The train to impossible places. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are going to read Chapter 3 of The Plane to Impossible Places. It says The Impossible Postal Express. Again, last chapter we got to meet Fletch. He's a squirrely little fella trying to build the train tracks that go through Susie's house. Susie's not all about it, and she's a little unsure of what's going on. I would be too if there was a crazy, impossible train trying to come through my house and some little guy with a harsh voice is yelling at me because he's trying to build a train through it. So, as we left off in the last chapter, the train had just come and it almost ran over Susie. So, let's see what's going on, shall we? We shall. The last thing that Susie saw before she hit the ground was a train erupting in a whirling mass of wheels, rods, and pistons from the tunnel mouth. Then she screwed her eyes shut, and for a second, the world was dark and full of noise. The hot steam gusted over her hands and face, metal screeched and clashed, and a whistle howled. She gritted her teeth and clapped her hands over her ears. The scream of brakes reached a crescendo and died suddenly away. There was a last outrush of steam, like a sigh of relief. And everything went quiet. Susie risked opening one eye. She had fallen at the foot of Fletch's tent, her feet just inches from the track. Rough hands grasped her shoulder, and she looked up to see Fletch standing over her, pulling her into a sitting position. She was too shocked to resist. "What were you thinking?" he said, hopping from foot to foot in agitation. "You almost became an incident." "A what?" she said, her ears still ringing. "An incident on the line, the worst type of incident it's possible to be." Susie looked at him blankly and wondered what to say. His tone made her want to apologize, but she wasn't sure he deserved it. In fact, didn't he still owe her an apology? She was just gathering her thoughts to say so when a new voice called out from somewhere high above them. "Fletch, is that you, old chap? What the dickens is going on down there?" They both looked up toward the source of the voice, and Susie almost fell backward in surprise. A mighty old steam locomotive towered over her, hissing and shuddering and belching yellowish steam from its chimney. It was bigger than any Susie had seen before, at least bits of it were. To her eyes, it looked like a large train had smashed into several smaller ones, and maybe a few buildings along the way, and the parts had all got mixed up and stuck together. Its chimney was too wide, none of the drive wheels quite matched, and the cylindrical belly of its boiler was too fat at the front and too narrow at the back. The driver's cab was nothing less than a neat little red brick cottage, complete with a tiled roof, window boxes, and a bright red front door which stood open on the near side of the boiler. It was from here that the voice had come, and as Susie watched, a small figure scampered out of it and onto a narrow gangway that ran along the length of the locomotive's flank, a few feet above the wheels. The figure carried a lantern. When they were directly above Fletch, shone the light down over the gangway's safety railing like a spotlight. "Fletch, we didn't just have an incident, did we?" Susie tried to make out the figure's face, but it was just a black patch of shadow behind the glare of the lantern. "It's worse than that, Stonker," said Fletch. "Look!" He hooked a thumb in Susie's direction, and the light swung over to cover her. "Good grief! A local! And it's awake?" "Looks like someone on the prep team messed up," said Fletch. Who was on shift tonight?" "Not a soul, old chap," said Stonker. "Didn't you get the memo? They did it all remotely." Something we can relate to, huh? "Pah!" Fletch spat. "No wonder. What do I keep telling them? This remote spell business is well and good, but you need people on the ground if you want the job done properly. I mean, it's just a sleeping spell. A common tooth fairy could do that." "Quite right, old boy. Quite right," said Stonker, clearly distracted. But given that it's here, what do you suggest we do with it? We're still behind schedule." Fletch scratched his scalp and looked Susie up and down. "I should put a call into HQ, I suppose. See if they can send someone to reset her memory." "Don't you dare," Susie said, jumping back. "You can't go poking around inside my mind. It doesn't belong to you." "It's probably for the best," Stonker told her. "We're not really supposed to be here, you see. Outside our jurisdiction and all that. And it won't do to have you giving us away. Although having said that, it might take HQ a while to get somebody out here. Couldn't you do it yourself, Fletch?" Fletch sucked his breath through his teeth. "I don't know, Stonks. Memories are fiddly, like unknotting spider webs. You never know which bit's connected to what. Maybe I could do a confusion spell instead. No, you won't, said Susie, backing away. I'm confused enough as it is. She squinted into the circle of light hiding Stonker. And I'm not an it, I'm a she. Thank you very much. Female species, eh? Said Stonker. Afraid I'm not really well versed on the fauna in these parts. Do you have a name? I'm Susie, said Susie. Susie Smith. And I'd like to know who you are and what you're doing here, please. I suppose we do owe you the courtesy. The light bobbed and weaved as Stonker grabbed the lantern. Then it flickered out entirely. It took Susie a few seconds to blink away the red and green smudge it left on her vision, and then she saw him. He was the same sort of creature as Fletch, though his skin was flinty gray and less warty and wrinkled. He wore a smart blue uniform with a coat that fell to his waist and a peaked cap with a silver piping. He looked down at her past both his enormous nose and an equally impressive salt and pepper mustache, as thick and lustrous as a badger, which hung down almost to his knees before the tips curled back up into a rigid little spirals. His blue eyes twinkled as he spoke. J.F. Stonker, he said, driver of the Impossible Postal Express. The finest troll train on all the rails. He reached up and gave the locomotive's boiler an affectionate pat. Your trolls, she said? How is that possible? We hadn't intended to stop, said Stonker, clearly misunderstanding her. But I'm afraid you wandered onto the tracks. You're jolly lucky the brakes have been just serviced. Excuse me. But that wasn't my fault, said Susie, feeling the temperature rise in her cheeks. The tracks aren't supposed to be here. None of this is supposed to be here, including you. This is all starting to feel terribly unfair. Fear not, said Stonker. We'll be on our way again momentarily, and Fletch will have the tracks up and everything back to normal and to its normal proportions in no time. You'd never know the difference. Normal proportions? For the first time, Susie realized there was a question she hadn't asked herself. How could such an enormous steam locomotive even fit inside the house? She looked up and saw the hall ceiling impossibly high above her head, the purple light shade like a distant hot air balloon. The hall had grown into the size of a cathedral without her even noticing. What happened? She said, wide-eyed. What did you do? Not really my department, I'm afraid, said Stonker. Fletch here is the technical genius. Fletch sniffed. I try my best. Susie hardly heard them. She was running back and forth trying to take it all in. The living room door was as tall as a cliff now, and she would have to stand on tiptoes if she wanted to reach the top of the baseboard. The kitchen door had vanished altogether, replaced by another enormous stone arch. The tracks didn't end there anymore, but ran on into the blank darkness beyond. Her voice echoed in the cavernous space as she cried, You shrank us! Nah, said Fletch, cocking his head to one side and plucking at the hair in his ears. I just gave the hall a bit of a stretch, that's all. You mean you made everything bigger? Susie gaped at him, horrified. But that's worse. How big's the house now? It must take up half the street. What sort of fly-by-night merchant do you take me for? Said Fletch. I didn't make the outside any bigger, and I haven't touched any of the other rooms. What would be the point of that? Wait a minute. Susie fought to digest this new information. You mean the house is still its normal size, even though the hall is bigger than the house? That's right, Fletch grinned, warming to his topic. It's pretty standard stuff, really. Your basic metadimensional engineering. A dash of magic, a few bits of double-sized sticky tape, job done. Susie looked again at the living room doorway. She could still see her parents beyond it, fast asleep and normal-sized, but the doorway itself seemed to flicker and stretch when she focused on it. It only took her a few seconds to realize she was seeing it in both sizes at the same time, but by then it had started to make her feel seasick, and she had to look away. No, she said, shaking her head. I'm sorry, but that's impossible. It is? Is it? Said Fletch, feigning surprise. You can't make something bigger on the inside than the outside. Of course you can. It's simple physics. Susie frowned. You mean physics? No, said Fletch. Physics. Like physics, only fusier. Or physics. Physics can't be fuzzy, said Susie, indignant that something so precious to her would be treated like a bit of a joke. It's either right or wrong. It won't let you break the rules. That's why Fuzzick's kind of saunters past him, said Fletch. It's easier than doing it's easier than doing everything by the book. He gave her an infuriating grin, and she was drawing breath to argue her case further when Stonker cleared his throat. This is all jolly nice, he said, but I'm afraid we really must be leaving. We're already late, and I want to get underway before... Mr. Stonker, Mr. Stonker! The voice came from the direction of the carriages. Too late, sighed Stonker, pinching the bridge of his enormous nose. Here he comes. The train's locomotive pulled a large tender behind it, which Susie assumed must be full of coal, or whatever fuel the engine burned. Behind that were two carriages. The first was big, bulky, and cylindrical, like an armored gasoline tanker, but with a row of small portholes in the side and a knot of tubes and chimneys sprouting from the top. The letters HEC were stenciled down the side of the large white script. The carriage at the rear was smaller and looked like an antique goods coach. The red paint peeled from its wooden panels. It was from this rear coach that another troll had emerged and was now hurrying toward them, waving frantically. He looked quite different from both Stonker and Fletch. His arms were long and bent in strange directions, and he seemed to have no legs at all, just a pair of large feet attached directly to his body. Only when he tripped and landed flat on his face did Susie realize he looked particularly strange. So here is a picture. I'm assuming this is the new troll that we're looking at, because I don't see the mustache that was described for Mr. Stonker's, and it's certainly not Fletch. So here's the picture of our new guy. He looked particularly strange. He was wearing a uniform that was several sizes too big for him. That's definitely the new guy. Aren't either of you going to help him? She asked as the new arrival floundered in a confusion of sleeves and coat tails, trying to get back on his feet. I suppose we ought to, said Stonker. Fletch, be a good chap and help the postmaster up, would you? Not in my job description, muttered Fletch. Why don't you do it? Because I'm all the way up here, Stonker said. Besides, I helped him up last time. Susie shook her head and hurried over to the flailing bundle of clothes. It was hard to tell which part of the troll was which, so she just reached out, hauled him up, and deposited him on what she hoped were his feet. His uniform wasn't the same as Stonker's, she saw. It was red instead of blue, and it looked older, more ornate. A tarnished gold medal dangled from the chest, and an old-fashioned horn or bugle was embroidered on both the shoulders, although the thread was badly frayed. The bundle shook itself, and another huge nose, followed by a small, wide-eyed face poked out from above the collar of the coat. This troll's skin was a pale lichen green and hardly wrinkled at all. Susie guessed he was much younger than the others. Oh, thank you, said the troll, and then, oh no, a local! He leaped into the air in fright, but his feet were already moving by the time he touched down, and he took off like a bullet, swerving around Susie and heading for Fletch and Stonker, where he promptly tripped over the hem of his coat and went sprawling once again. It's all right, postmaster, called Stonker. We think she's harmless. The fallen troll said something in response, but his words were muffled by several layers of cloth. Neither of the others made a move to help him, so with a weary sigh, Susie retraced her steps and set him back on his feet. He shrugged the uniform away from his face and gave her a suspicious look. Are you sure, Mr. Stonker? She looks like she might bite. I promise I won't, said Susie. She'd have to chew her way through all that uniform. She'd have to chew her way all through all that uniform first, Mr. Wilmot, said Fletch. You know they come in smaller sizes, right? The postmaster sniffed and turned his nose up. I've told you before, Fletch. This is my father's uniform and his father's before him. I have a legacy to uphold. Legacy needs longer legs, boy, said Fletch with a sly grin. Wilmot flared his nostrils in response. What exactly do you want, postmaster? Said Stonker. As you can see, we're a trifle busy. I came to see what was causing the delay, said Wilmot. Our next customer is waiting for us. I'm aware of that, said Stonker. And I can't just leave the package on her doorstep and run, Wilmot went on, jiggling from foot to foot inside his uniform. It needs to be signed for. And I don't want to be the one who rings her doorbell if we're late. We'll get there as quickly as possible, said Stonker. I'm just waiting for... Aha! Here it is! Here we are! A second figure had emerged from the driver's cab and was hurrying along the gangway. Susie could tell immediately that it was not like the others. It was bigger than she was, loping along on all fours in a powerful run. It wore faded blue overalls, but was otherwise covered from top to bottom in vivid yellow fur. Only when it came to a halt beside Stonker and reared up onto its hind legs did Susie realize what she was looking at. What's she looking at? You can see there's Mr. Stonkers, and that is what came out. Is that a bear? She exclaimed. The creature spared her a curious glance. A brown bear, to be precise, said Stonker. Ursus arctos. A bit of a departure for a troll train, I'll admit, but she scored top marks in all her entrance exams. Ursel here keeps the firebox stoked and the wheels turning. Ursel flashed a set of startlingly white fangs at Susie, who wasn't sure if the gesture was meant as a greeting or a threat. She tried not to show her discomfort. How are we looking, Ursel? Said Stonker. Ruff, said the bear with a voice so deep that Susie felt it was a shiver in her bones. Jolly good. Well, stand by the valves and be ready to give it plenty of pep. I want to get out of here before anything else goes wrong. Rumph. With a last glance down at the assembled audience, Ursel turned and began loping back toward the cab. Susie felt the question well up in her throat before she had time to stop it. If it's a brown bear, why is it bright yellow? Everything stopped. Stonker and Wilmot stared at her, mortified, and even the train seemed to have quieted its hissing and clanking. Fletch winced. Then, very slowly, all eyes turned to Ursel. Susie clapped her hands over her mouth as though she could stuff the question back inside it. She could tell from everyone's reaction that it had been the wrong thing to say, but it shouldn't have been. This whole situation, trolls and bears and trains and just all of it, was starting to upset her. Because while she never would have admitted it, she had always been secretly proud of her ability to understand the nuts and bolts of reality. Now, though, it felt as if the reality was tilting underneath her, threatening to throw her off. She just wanted to make sense of it again. Ursel turned and padded back toward them, dark eyes fixed on Susie, who was now too terrified to move. It's going to eat me, she thought, eaten by a bear in my own house. But the thought that made her saddest was this. Now I'll never get to understand what's happening. Ursel reared up and leaned over the railing. A string of saliva hung from the large incisor. Ruff, Ursel grunted. Run forth, ruff. Susie stood to polite attention, not daring to take her eyes off those fangs. What did it say? She said with a pleading look toward Stonker. The driver gave a knowing smile and his eyes twinkled. She said she's not it. She's a she, thank you very much. And it's none of your business if she happens to prefer being blonde. Susie looked again at Ursel with a mixture of shock and relief. You mean you're a girl? This was met with a guttural roar that made everyone jump back. What? Susie said, trembling with a shock. What did I do wrong this time? It's a common mistake, said Stonker, rubbing his ringing ears. She prefers the term woman. Something to do with being a responsible adult who pays her taxes. Ursel flexed her shoulders and gave a decisive nod before turning and lumbering back toward the cab. Susie wasn't sure it was possible for bears to wink, but she was sure Ursel gave her one as she went. A few seconds later, steam hissed from between the driving wheels. The boiler rattled and the whole train lurched forward an inch, straining against the brakes. Wilmot turned and dashed back toward the rear coach, his coattails flapping behind him. I'm sorry there's no more time for pleasantries. I'm sorry there's no more time for pleasantries, Stonker called over the rising noise. I'll leave you in Fletch's capable hands, Fletch grunted. But I still don't understand what all this means, Susie protested. Where did it all come from? Where are you going? Stonker drew himself up, eyes twinkling. From Trollville to the five corners of reality, my dear. No package too big, no postcard too small. Come rain, shine, or meteor shower, the impossible postal express will deliver. He whipped off his cap and gave a theatrical bow as the locomotive strained forward again, its carriages rattling. Farewell, he called, steadying himself against the handrail. And try not to worry. Fletch really is jolly skilled. He turned and hurried back along the gangway to the cab, slamming the door shut behind him. A second later, the brakes unlocked with an almighty clunk, and the huge driving wheels ground slowly forward. I suppose we'd better get on with it, said Fletch, cracking his knuckles. He reached to his tool belt and paused. Where is it? Susie had no idea what he was talking about, but some nervous instinct told her to start backing away as the train lumbered into motion beside them. I can't do my job without it, said Fletch. He patted his pockets and looked around in confusion. Then his head snapped up and his eyes fixed on Susie. You, he exclaimed, you took it from me. Susie started retreating slowly as Fletch advanced on her. What? Where is it? I need it. Before Susie could answer, her foot came down on something hard and narrow, and it rolled out from under her, taking her foot with it. She felt a moment of weightlessness before she landed flat on her back. She sat up, nursing her head with one hand, and looked down to see what she had stepped on. It was Fletch's metal rod. She must have dropped it when she threw herself clear of the train. He saw it at the same instant she did and pounced for it. He was fast, but she was faster. She snatched it up and sprang away. Give it back, he shouted. No, she said. Whatever it is, you'll use it on me. You just said so. Fletch crept toward her, his hands up as though she was pointing a gun at him. I know how to use it properly. You don't. I don't want to use it, she said. I don't want you to either. The locomotive slid into the archway. The huffing of its chimney and the clank of its wheels, the hiss and gush of steam echoed back out of the darkness as it continued to gather speed, drawing the carriages ever closer to the tunnel mouth. Susie felt a sudden tug, a fear that something very important was right in front of her, but was slipping away. Are there really 5 corners of reality? She asked. Fletch stopped, surprised. Of course there are. Don't they teach you anything useful at school? The tender slipped through the tunnel mouth and was out of sight. Now give back what's not yours. He started forward again. Susie didn't realize she had made her mind up until she started running, not away from Fletch, but toward him. She saw the startled look on his face as he spread his arms wide to catch her, but she was too quick. She heard his little yelp of shock as she rushed past him and felt the slight tug on her bathrobe as he tried to snatch at her. She was running level with the train now, but it was still gathering speed and steadily outpacing her. The tug of anxiety felt stronger, but clearer as well. The world made no sense anymore, and because of this train and the things that were on it, if she ever wanted to understand the world again, she couldn't afford to let the train go without her. If she did, they would make her forget she'd ever seen it, and she'd live out the rest of her life in blissful ignorance, never knowing any better. And that scared her. That scared her so badly, she put her head down and ran until she could feel her heartbeat in her throat. The strange cylindrical tanker that bore the letters HEC entered the tunnel, leaving only the red coach at the rear. It was close enough to touch, but the tunnel mouth was fast approaching, and she was running out of ground. She had no idea what would happen if she ran it on into the tunnel, and she wasn't keen to find out. Stop! Bellowed Fletch. The carriage slid past her, the leading wheels vanishing over the threshold. The door through which Wilmot had disappeared was gaining on her fast. Last chance. She put on her final burst of speed, swerved toward the coach, and jumped. That's Susie jumping at the coach. Focus it here. What do you think is going to happen, guys? Her hand closed around the coach's door handle in the same second that the world around her went dark. The deep echoes of the hall were swept away by the noisy rush of the tunnel. Cold wind tugged at her hair and clothes, and she planted her feet as securely as she could on the narrow metal step below the door. Looking back, she was just in time to see the tunnel mouth shrinking away into the distance. Framed inside it was the tiny figure of Fletch, standing in the hallway, shaking his fist in anger. And that's the end of chapter 3. Whoa, lot to unpack there. We met a lot of new characters. We met the conductor, Sponkers. We met Mr. Wilmot, who is the postmaster of this impossible postal express. And we met Ursel, who's a giant brown bear who prefers to be blonde, because blondes have more fun. Anyway, nice to see you guys. Well, nice to be here for you guys. Please check back in for chapter 4 soon. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're staying safe out there. You're all amazing. Stay cool, stay fresh, and keep learning.